tensions continue to rise as a federal judge demands more answers about deportation flights under the Alien Enemies Act. And the Justice Department refused to answer some of those questions, leading to a new order for information. The deadline is today, and President Trump has called for the judge's impeachment, and Chief Justice Roberts has even weighed in on it. To help us understand what this means for our system of checks and balances, we are joined by retired Superior Court Judge LaDoris Cordell. Judge Cordell, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Well, you know, when people hear about a standoff between a president and the court, some might just say, well, OK, this is just politics as usual. But this is not that. This is different. Tell us why, please.
Well, judges are not politicians. Politicians make promises to their constituents to give them what their constituents want. That's what politicians do. Judges can make only one promise, and that is to uphold the law. So this is not and can never be politics as usual. What we're facing is a constitutional crisis, and no one should take this lightly.
No, not at all. And this is obviously raising a lot of concerns. And you mentioned, I mentioned at the top there, even up to the Supreme Court. We'll get to that in just a bit. Who actually has a final say in a case like this? And what happens if the government just keeps ignoring these rules and finding ways to kind of continue doing business as they see fit?
Well, the most important case ever decided, in my view, by the Supreme Court is Marbury versus Madison. That was in 1803. And there the Supreme Court declared acts of Congress are unconstitutional. It allows them to declare acts of Congress unconstitutional. So, and in fact, the Chief Justice, John Marshall, who wrote that, said it is emphatically the province and duty of the Judicial Department to say what the law is. So the fundamental principle of the rule of law is that once the legal process, including all the appeals, have reached completion, public officials must obey an order of the courts. So the courts have the final say. So what happens then if the courts have the final say if people don't abide by the order, right? So we had one example of that when Richard Nixon, he was ordered to comply by turning over secret White House tapes, even though he knew if he turned them over, his presidency was going to end, but he complied with the law because that is the way the system works. So what happens if you get an administration, and we're getting inklings of this, that says, oh, we don't care. We're not going to comply with the rule of law. So that means there's really one option for the courts, and that's contempt of court.
Right. And we know that kind of what you're mentioning there. We know there was the order for the planes to come back that were taking those immigrants away, and they just didn't. The plane kept going. And so there was a lot of concern with that. I'll get you here also, Judge. Let me ask you this. The justice, you had John Roberts, who did mention that he didn't say his name, President Trump, but he did mention that we should not be going around trying to impeach judges as President Trump has suggested. What do you make of this when we have the Supreme Court even weighing in with opinions?
Well, this isn't the first time that Roberts has spoken out in this fashion. In 2018, Trump called the judge who ruled against his administration's asylum policy an Obama judge. And the Chief Justice said, no, we don't have Obama judges or Trump judges, Bush judges or Clinton judges. We have our independent judiciary. He did it again in 2020. Senator Chuck Schumer made comments at a rally outside the Supreme Court and condemning the court. And this was when they were looking at the abortion case. And Roberts spoke out again. And Schumer then walked back his comments, saying he only meant that there would be political consequences for a decision coming out. This isn't the first time he's done this, and it is significant. He doesn't do it all the time. And it's very significant that he quickly said this time.
All right. I have one more quickly for me here. What might this constitutional showdown mean for both immigration policy and the balance of powers, and especially given the president's rising approval rating?
Well, so what we're talking about here really is the president's response or lack of response to the order on the deportations of the Venezuelans. And they're using the Alien Enemies Act to do this. There's no due process. There's no need to prove any charges in the court of law. So this is where that law can only be used when they've declared war between the U.S. and a foreign government. And we're not at war with Venezuela. This is the constitutional crisis. So the issue becomes a judge saying, turn those planes back. They didn't do it. The judge has now said, come into court and we're going to hash this out. And this is really what's the key here. Is the administration going to comply? Is the court going to hold them in contempt? And if so, how is that going to be enforced? And I will tell you finally, Kelvin, the most important force swaying any of this will be public outrage, quite frankly. Our Constitution is built on checks and balances, and we all have to insist that the president cannot simply defy court orders that they don't like.
Yeah, checks and balances seems to be in question right about now. We'll continue to watch this. We're only not even 60 days in, Judge Cordell, and we're having so many conversations already. Thank you so much for your time this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you, and thank you for your questions.